The park was peaceful, a haven of golden leaves and a soft breeze, until the agent Brodie Miller decided to break up that tranquility. He saw an old man with dark skin sitting on a bench feeding the birds. He only saw a target, someone to harass, someone whom to dominate. He saw the color of the man's skin, and he assumed he was a vagrant, a criminal potentially. He put the handcuffs on her with a mocking smile, ignoring the man's calm warnings. He didn't know the vagabond was Titus Thorne, a retired police chief with 30 years of service and a medal of courage. I didn't know I was arresting a legend. And I certainly didn't know that by the time the sun set, his career, it would have ended and a war would begin. One that would leave one of them in a wheelchair, one wheeled, the other upright. This is the story of how arrogance found his partner. The Tuesday afternoon sun in Oak Haven. It was a pale, diluted gold, seeping through among the iridescent leaves of the enormous oak trees of Whispering Pines Park. It was the public face of a gated community, impeccable, silent, and excessively ordered. For Titus Thorne, it was the closest thing to peace there was. Found since he left the chaotic and bloody streets of Detroit 3 years ago. At 68, Titus was a man who carried his history in his bearing. He sat on the wrought iron bench with his back straight, broad, firm shoulders, a habit of decades of wearing a bulletproof vest. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat over a white shirt, impeccable buttons, his shoes polished to a mirror shine that reflected the autumn sky. For anyone with eyes, he looked like a grandfather taking a moment to breathe. For everyone, with a soulful expression, he seemed a man who deserved his rest. In his lap rested a small paper bag of seeds. Premium birds, a mix of sunflower hearts, millet, and crushed peanuts. I didn't buy the cheap one. "Here you have it," Titus boomed, his voice a deep, raspy bass that seemed to make the air vibrate around them. "Don't fight. There's enough for everyone." He scattered a handful of seeds near the toe of his Oxford shoe. A flocket descended on wings. Sparrows, a jay, bold blue, and his favorite, a cardinal bright red that he had secretly called Red. Titus watched them, his dark eyes softening. For 30 years, his eyes had scanned crowds searching for weapons, nervous ticks, from the flash of a cannon. Now he just wanted watching the birds eat. The peace was shattered, not by a noise, but by a presence. A shadow fell over the bench, blocking the sun. The gravel crunched, a heavy, deliberate sound. Military-style boots. Titus didn't look up immediately. He finished dusting his hands, a slow, methodical movement. He took a deep breath, smelling the cheap perfume and the metallic tang of gun oil before even just seeing the uniform. "Get up." The voice was young, bold, and vibrated with a sense of power. Not one. Titus slowly turned his head. 5 feet away stood Agent Brodie Miller. He looked to be about 24 years old, with a buzz cut that was a week that's too long, and a uniform that was tense at the buttons, not because muscle, but by a softness that tried, concealed with an overloaded tactical vest of equipment. He had a taser, a baton, 2 spare magazines, a radio, a tourniquet, and a pistol that it seemed too big for her hip. "Good afternoon, Agent," Titus said, his voice balanced. "Can I help you?" "I said get up," Miller barked, approaching. The birds scattered in a flurry of wings. Titus watched them leave. A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "I'm resting, son," Titus said. "Is there any problem?" "Don't call me son," Miller snapped. His hand slid to his belt, hovering near the taser. "We've received reports of vagrants, loitering, and drug activity in the park." Titus looked around the empty park. "I see, and I fit in the description." "You fit the profile," Miller said, his eyes scanning Titus with open disdain. An expensive coat, sitting on a bench in the middle of the workday. Probably stolen. Show me your ID. Titus sighed, the sound of a man who's had that conversation 1,000 times. Officer, I live 3 blocks from here, at 405 Elm Street. I'm a retired civil servant. I'm just feeding the birds. Feeding wildlife is a violation of Municipal Ordinance 4002. Miller lied, and he refused to identify himself. Assaulting a law enforcement officer is a crime punishable by arrest. Now stand up. Titus gauged the distance. He assessed Miller's stance. The boy's weight was off. Too far forward. If Titus had wanted, he could have swept Miller's leg and pinned him in 3 seconds. But Titus wasn't that man anymore, and he knew that a black man fighting a police officer in Oak Haven would end up dead, not vindicated. Titus rose slowly, unfurling his imposing 6'2" frame. It loomed over Miller. I'm going to get my wallet, Titus said, narrating his movements, a survival habit. It's in my back right pocket. Don't move, Miller yelled, panicking. A flicker of emotion bloomed in his eyes at Titus's size, hands to his head, fingers interlaced. Officer, this is unnecessary. Do it, Miller shouted, drawing his taser and pointing it at Titus's chest. The red dot of the laser danced across Titus's expensive wool coat. Titus froze. He stared at the laser. Then he looked at Miller. You're making a mistake, Titus said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. A very expensive mistake. Turn around, Miller advanced, shoving Titus hard against the bench. You're under arrest for loitering, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Miller grabbed Titus's wrists, twisting them behind his back. He put the handcuffs on him, tight, too tight. The metal bit into the bone. These are too tight, Titus said. Check the space. You're supposed to be able to fit a pinky finger between the cuffs. Oh, the doll. Shut up, Miller growled, shoving Titus forward. You don't tell me how to do my job. You're going to the station, Grandpa. Let's see how smart you are in a cell. As Miller pushed Titus toward the patrol car, a Dodge Charger with its engine idling, Titus saw a neighbor. Mrs. Gable was walking her poodle. He stopped, staring in horror. Titus gave her a small, reassuring nod. Don't worry, the nod said. I'll take care of it. But inside the fire was burning. It wasn't the rage of a criminal. It was the cold, hard fury of a master craftsman, watching an apprentice set fire to the workshop. The trip to the police station was a demonstration of petty tyranny. Miller was driving aggressively, braking sharply at traffic lights so that Titus would jerk forward in the back seat. The partition screen was scratched and dirty. Is he comfortable back there? Miller sneered, glancing in the rearview mirror. Not so tough anymore, huh? I bet he thought he could just walk into Oak Haven and do whatever he wanted. I bought my house in Oak Haven 3 years ago, Titus said calmly. I paid cash. Miller laughed, a cruel, grating sound. Yeah, right. Drug money. Or did he rob a bank back in the day? Titus didn't answer. He was memorizing Miller's badge number, 4922. He was noting the time. He was listing the procedural violations in his head. 1. No Miranda read. 2. Excessive force with restraints. 3. Lack of probable cause. 4. Unsafe transport. They pulled into the Oak Haven precinct, a clean, modern, brick and glass building. It was quiet. This wasn't Detroit's 12th precinct with its screaming junkies and overworked desk sergeants. This was a library with guns. Miller pulled Titus out of the car, gripping his arm firmly. He walked him through the back door, chin up, looking for applause. The booking area was staffed by Sergeant Sarah Jenkins. Titus knew the type right away. 20 years in the body, tired, cynical, but competent. She was drinking coffee and reading a report. "Look what I got," Miller announced, pushing Titus toward the counter. "I found him in Whispering Pines. He refused to identify himself, resisted, belligerent. Jenkins didn't look up at first. "Name?" Miller said. "He wouldn't give it to me." "John Doe." "My name is Titus," his voice said, filling the room. "I'm Titus Thorne." Jenkins paused. His pen hovered over the paper. That voice. It had a cadence, a command not often heard in Oak Haven. He looked up. He saw the coat. He saw the dignified face, the gray beard, the eyes that held a storm of intelligence, and then he saw the handcuffs. He squinted. "Thorne? Titus? Thorne?" "That's right, Sergeant," Titus said politely. "I believe we met briefly at the Interstate Law Enforcement Conference in Chicago. You were there with Captain Henderson." The color drained from Sarah Jenkins' face so quickly it was like a curtain falling. She rose from her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What?" Miller asked, looking at them both, his brow furrowed. "Sergeant, he's just a guy. I'm putting him in cell 2. "Miller." Jenkins circled the desk, his hands trembling slightly. "Take those handcuffs off him right now." "What? Why?" "He's under arrest." "I said take them off," Jenkins roared. The sound echoed off the concrete block walls, startling the dispatcher in the corner. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Miller took a step back, confused. "He's nobody. He was feeding birds." "This is Chief Titus Thorne," Jenkins hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Titus. "Retired police chief of Detroit's 12th Precinct. He's the man who wrote the standard operating procedure for urban de-escalation. He's a legend, you—" Miller froze. He looked at Titus. The vagrant was gone. In his place stood a titan. Titus looked at Miller, his expression inscrutable. "The keys, Agent. My wrists are swelling." Miller fumbled clumsily for his keys. He couldn't find the keyhole. His hands were shaking. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that he was experiencing whiplash. The handcuffs clicked open. Titus rubbed his wrists, inspecting the red indentations. "Thanks, Sergeant. Now is Robert Harrison here?" "Yes." "Yes, sir," Jenkins stammered. "I'll go get him." "Bob and I have known each other for a long time," Titus said to the air. "I was his training officer back in '98. Miller looked like he was going to throw up. 2 minutes later, Chief Robert Harrison stormed into the log room. He was a bald man with a soft belly, a man who had moved to the suburbs to escape the stress of the city. He looked at Titus, then at Miller, then back at Titus. "Titus," Harrison breathed. "I'm speechless." "I have a few," Titus said tersely. "But let's talk in his office, and bring in Officer Miller." Inside the office, the reprimand was legendary. "He profiled me, Bob," Titus said, sitting in the leather guest chair while Miller stood, sweating through his uniform. "He saw a black man in a coat and decided he was a criminal. He didn't ask questions. He didn't investigate. He escalated." "Brody, what the hell were you thinking?" Harrison demanded, slamming his hand on the desk. He looked suspicious." "Chief," Miller muttered, his defiance waning, but still present. "He was loitering." "He was sitting on a bench," Titus snapped. "That's what benches are for." Titus stood and walked over to Miller. He leaned in close. "You wear that badge like a crown," Titus whispered. "But it's a burden. It's a duty. You think you're a wolf, son. You're not. You're just a scared kid with a gun, and that makes you dangerous." "I want him suspended," Titus told Harrison. pending a full internal investigation, and I want a written apology." "Done," Harrison said immediately. "Miller, give me your badge and your gun. You're on leave without pay, effective immediately." Miller's face twisted with hatred. He unbuckled his holster and slammed it down on the desk. He ripped his badge off his shirt, tearing off a button. "This is bullshit," Miller spat. "You're taking his side because he's a boss. He's just an old man." "Get lost," Harrison said. Miller turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. He glared at Titus. "Do you think this is over?" Miller said, his voice trembling with rage. "Do you think you can come to my town and humiliate me?" "It's not your town, Miller," Titus said. "It's the people's town. Now get out of here before I add insubordination to your record." Miller left, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. "Sorry, Titus," Harrison said, wiping his forehead. He's got problems. I'll take care of him." "You'd better," Titus warned, "because if he comes near me again, I won't be calling you. I'll be calling my lawyers. And Bob, you know how I handle threats." Harrison nodded. He knew. Titus left the precinct a free man, but he felt the weight of the encounter. He knew men like Miller. They didn't learn their lessons. They harbored grudges. And Titus was right. The war had just begun. 2 weeks passed. The leaves in Whispering Pines turned from gold to brown. Titus tried to return to his routine, but the peace was gone. It started small. One morning, Titus woke up to find his trash cans overturned, garbage scattered across his immaculate lawn. Coffee grounds and eggshells littered his driveway. Raccoons, he told himself, but raccoons don't slash tires. 3 days later, he went outside to check on his vintage 1968 Mustang, his pride and joy, to find the sidewalls of both rear tires slashed. It was a clean cut, knife-like. Titus stood in his driveway, the cold wind biting his face. He looked down the street. A dark sedan was parked 2 blocks away. As soon as Titus glanced at it, the engine roared to life and it slowly drove away. He recognized the car. It was Miller's personal vehicle, a black Chevy Impala. Titus called Harrison. "I can't prove it was him, Titus," Harrison said, sounding tired on the phone. "I questioned him. He has an alibi. His mother says he was home all night." "Your mother's lying," Titus said. "Bob, she's escalating. You know the pattern. I can't put a detail on your house for slashed tires. I don't have the personnel." "Fine," Titus said. "I'll take care of my own security." Titus called a local contractor he trusted. By the end of the week, 405 Elm Street was a fortress. High-definition cameras with night vision were installed on every corner. Motion-activated strobe lights, a reinforced steel frame for the front door. But Miller wasn't finished. He had friends on the force, friends like Officer Griggs. A week later, Titus was driving to the supermarket. He was respecting the speed limit, signaling every turn. Blue lights flashed behind him. Titus stopped. He kept his hands on the wheel. He launched the recording app on his phone and placed it in the cup holder, face down, but with the microphone facing up. Officer Griggs approached the window. "Search?" Griggs said, smiling. "Reason for stopping?" Titus asked. "Taillights out," Griggs said. "They were working when I pulled out of the driveway 5 minutes ago," Titus said. "Well, they're not working now. Get out of the vehicle." Titus got out. Griggs walked to the back of the Mustang. He held up his heavy Maglite flashlight. Crack! The sound of plastic breaking was unmistakable. "Look at that," Griggs said, pointing to the freshly punched hole in the bits of red plastic still falling onto the asphalt. "Broken. That's a safety violation. And is that the smell of alcohol I'm getting?" Titus glared at Griggs. "I haven't had a drink in 20 years, Griggs, and we both know you just broke that light. By the way, my dashcam is working, looking back. Griggs's smile faltered. He glanced toward the rear window. A small camera lens blinked red. Get out of here, Griggs muttered, handing the license back to Titus. Consider this a warning. Warning received, Titus said. He went home, his heart pounding. They were trying to frame him. A DUI charge would ruin his reputation, maybe even affect his pension. They were trying to destroy him. That night, Titus sat in his study, looking at the dashcam footage. It clearly showed Griggs swinging the flashlight. He picked up the phone. He dialed a number in Chicago. Sign Cochran. How can I direct your call? I need to speak to Maya Thorne, Titus said. Tell him he's his father and tell him to bring the war chest. Maya arrived the next day. She was 32, sharp as a tack, and possessed a fury that made grown men tremble. She drove a Porsche Cayenne and wore a suit that screamed billable hours. She set up a command center in Titus's dining room. This is systematic harassment, Maya said, reviewing the footage. Title 42, Section 1983, disenfranchisement under color of law. We can sue the department, the city, and Miller personally. I don't just want a lawsuit, Maya, Titus said, looking out the window at the darkening street. I want to stop him. He's going to hurt someone. If not me, then the next black man he sees in the park. We need to bring this out into the open, Maya said. Make a public statement. Force Harrison to fire him. There's a city council meeting tomorrow night, Titus said. Harrison will be there. Perfect. Maya smiled, a cold, predatory smile. We're going to make a scene. But they didn't know Miller was watching. He was parked down the street using binoculars. He saw Maya arrive. He saw the files. Lawyers, Miller spat, sitting in the dark cab of his pickup truck. He took a swig from a flask of whiskey. They think they can use the law. I am the law. He reached under the seat and pulled out a prepaid phone. He typed a message to a private group chat titled, The Blue Shield. Target is bringing in lawyers. We need to speed up the timeline. Who's with me? 3 dots appeared. Then a reply. We've got you covered, brother. We're going to teach them a lesson. The storm was coming, and this time it wouldn't just be a broken taillight. The Oak Haven Community Center was a brick-and-mortar testament to the town's wealth. Vaulted ceilings, polished mahogany floors, and a scent of beeswax and old money. On a typical Wednesday, the town hall meeting would be a somnolent affair discussing zoning laws for fence heights or the budget for the annual Tulip Festival. Tonight, however, the air was electric. Word had gotten out. Titus Thorne sat in the front row, his posture rigid, his hands resting on his knees. Beside him was Maya, a shark in a silk blouse, her laptop connected to the projection system. The room was packed. Neighbors who had seen police cruisers parked outside Titus's house for weeks whispered behind his back. Chief Robert Harrison sat at the long table on the stage, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Beside him stood the mayor, a nervous man, deeply concerned about property values. The floor is open for new business, the mayor announced, his voice trembling. Maya rose. She didn't walk to the microphone. She marched. My name is Maya Thorne, she began, her voice projecting clearly without a microphone at first. I'm an attorney with the Cochran firm in Chicago, and I'm here to represent my father, Chief Titus Thorne, regarding a systematic campaign of harassment by officers at this precinct. A murmur rippled through the crowd. We are aware of the complaint, Harrison said quickly, leaning into his microphone. As I told your father, Miss Thorne, this is an internal personnel matter. We are investigating Officer Miller's conduct. Investigation is a slow word, Chief, Maya said, plugging the HDMI cable into her laptop. Let's speed it up. The enormous screen behind the stage flickered, coming to life. The audio hissed, then exploded. It was footage from the dashcam of Titus's Mustang. The timestamp was clearly visible. The video showed the sunlit street, the blue lights, and then Officer Griggs walking to the back of the car. The audience watched in stunned silence as Griggs looked around, raised his heavy maglite, and brandished it. Crack. The sound amplified through the auditorium speakers. It sounded like a gunshot. "Oops," Griggs's voice said mockingly from the speakers. "Broken." The crowd gasped. Mrs. Gable, the poodle's neighbor, covered her mouth. "Good heavens," she whispered aloud. Maya paused the video on Griggs's mocking face. "This," Maya said, pointing at the screen, "is not law enforcement. This is extortion. This is a gang with badges." My father was pulled over for a broken taillight that was broken during the stop by Officer Griggs, a known associate of Officer Brodie Miller. She clicked on a slide. A timeline appeared. October 4th, unlawful detention of Titus Thorne. October 12th, vandalism at the Thorne residence. Trash. October 15th, damage to a vehicle with flat tires. October 22nd, traffic stop, fraudulent and property damage. "We have a sworn statement," Mia continued, "from 3 neighbors who saw a black Chevrolet Impala registered to Brodie Miller parked on Elm Street during the moments of the acts of vandalism." He turned to face Harrison. The room. It was so quiet you could hear the projector fan whirring. "Chief Harrison," Maya said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm, "it has a rebellious element. In his department, a racist and vindictive cell harasses citizens. If Miller and Griggs are not fired immediately, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit against this town that it will bankrupt Oak Haven. I will sue for the department's budget. I will sue your pension. I will take over this town hall when I'm done." Harrison was sweating profusely. The mayor looked like he was about to faint. The public pressure was palpable. People were pulling out their phones, live streaming. The moment. Harrison stammered. He looked at the angry faces of the voters. He looked at the damning evidence in the screen. "I've seen enough." Harrison stood up. "Officer Griggs is dismissed. I am immediately taking action, and I am formally upgrading Officer Miller's suspension to termination, pending final paperwork tomorrow morning. We are going to root out this corruption." The room erupted in applause. Titus didn't applaud. He just watched Harrison, with her eyes half closed. She knew that cornering a rat didn't make her disappear. He made her bite. 5 miles away, in a dimly lit basement that smelled of stale beer and gun oil, Brodie Miller watched the live stream on his phone. His face was a contorted mask of fury. He watched as the town he thought he owned. It turned against him. He saw how his boss, the man he was supposed to trust, was handing him over to the wolves. "Fired," Miller whispered. He threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. He wasn't a cop anymore. The badge was gone. The boarding house was gone. His identity, the only thing that made him feel like a man, was stripped away by an old black man and his lawyer daughter. The burner phone on the table vibrated. It was the group chat, the Blue Shield. "Miller, did you see that? We need to move." A pause, then a response from Griggs. "Griggs, that's it, Brodie. Harrison fired me. I'm gone. I'm deleting this chat. Don't contact me. User Griggs has left the chat. User Sergeant_Mac has left the chat. The user Rookie_T, he left the chat. One by one, they left. The Brotherhood. It evaporated the moment the pressure became too high. Miller stared at the screen, his breath ragged. He was alone. "No!" he hissed, standing up. He walked to his closet. He moved aside the hanging clothes and opened a heavy steel safe. Inside lay his personal arsenal, an AR-15 with a holographic sight, a pump-action shotgun, a tactical vest he'd bought online. Illegal for civilians, but which he'd kept. "I'm not the criminal," Miller muttered, his eyes wide and fixed, his mind fracturing under the pressure of his own narcissism. "They are. They invaded my city." He grabbed the rifle. He grabbed the vest. He reached deep into the safe and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, taking a long, fiery swig. "If I go down," he said to the empty room, "I'm taking the boss with me." But he wasn't referring to Harrison. He was referring to the real boss, the one on Elm Street. The storm hit Oak Haven around 10 o'clock at night. It was a violent late autumn storm, tearing the last leaves from the trees and lashing the streets with freezing rain. The wind howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of the colonial houses at 405 Elm Street. The house was dark, but not asleep. Titus Thorne sat in the living room armchair, facing the front door. He wasn't wearing pajamas. He wore dark cargo pants and a black tactical sweater. On the side table, next to a cup of iced tea, lay his Sig Sauer P226, his service weapon from Detroit. He knew that 30 years of police work gave a man a sixth sense. It's a tingling in the back of the neck, a coppery taste in the mouth. The public humiliation at City Hall wouldn't end this. It would accelerate it. Miller was a narcissist. Titus had seen that type 100 times. A narcissist doesn't accept defeat. He seeks annihilation. "Dad." Maya was at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a robe. She looked small in the shadows. "Go back to bed," Titus said gently. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" "The storm," Titus lied. "Just checking the windows." "You're expecting it, aren't you?" Maya came downstairs, her voice trembling slightly. Titus didn't answer right away. He picked up the cig, checked the bedroom, verified the brass, and put it back. "Miller has nothing to lose," Titus said. "A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. Go to the safe room in the basement, Maya. Lock the door. Don't leave until I say my catchphrase. Dad, I'm not letting you. Maya." Titus's voice was an order, a whip that silenced her. "This isn't a debate. This is a tactical situation. If he comes, he'll come to kill. I need to know you're safe so I can do what I have to do. Now go." Maya hesitated, tears stinging her eyes. She saw the change in her father. The friendly birdwatcher was gone. The boss had returned. She nodded, turned, and crept toward the basement door. Titus waited. 2:15 a.m. The motion sensor light on the entryway blinked. Rain was pouring down, blurring the image on Titus's iPad, but he saw her, a shape moving through the hedges. Not a casual stroll, a tactical advance. Squatting, gun raised. Titus touched the screen. A target. Heavy weaponry. "He brought a rifle," Titus whispered. "Coward." Titus stood and moved stealthily into the hallway. He didn't turn on the lights. He knew every creak of the floorboards. He knew the layout of his house better than Miller knew his own soul. Crash! The glass in the kitchen door at the back of the house shattered. Miller didn't pick the lock. He forced his way in. He wanted terror. He wanted them to know he was there. Titus heard the crunch of boots on the kitchen tiles. He heard the heavy, wet breathing of a man flooded with adrenaline. "Titus Miller!" he yelled. The sound was ragged, slightly slurred. He was drunk. "Get out, old man. Time for your medicine." Titus leaned back against the dining room wall. He held his breath. Miller was moving around the kitchen, sweeping the rifle barrel back and forth, knocking pots and pans off the counters. Clang! Crash! "You think you can take my life?" Miller roared. Blam! He fired at the ceiling. Plaster fell. "I'm the police. I'm the authority." Titus closed his eyes for a second, focusing. Intoxicated target. Erratic. Heavy firepower. He's sweeping right and left. Titus moved. He didn't run. He hunted. He slipped through the shadows of the living room, circling around to flank the kitchen entrance. Miller kicked open the dining room door. Lightning illuminated his figure. He looked like a nightmare soaked to the bone, his eyes wild. The AR-15 was propped awkwardly against his tactical vest. "Where are you?" Miller taunted, ducking under the bed. "Put the gun down, Brody," Titus said. His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Miller whirled around, firing blindly into the darkened room. Bam! 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 Bullets ripped through the drywall, shattered a lamp, ripped apart the couch. "Show yourself!" Miller yelled, his magazine clicking empty. He scrambled to reload, his wet hands slipping on the metal. That was when Titus emerged from the shadows. He didn't fire. He moved with terrifying speed for a 68-year-old man. He closed the distance in 3 strides. Miller chambered the new magazine, but before he could raise the barrel, Titus was there. Titus gripped the rifle barrel with his left hand, forcing it toward the ceiling. With his right, he jammed the butt of his pistol into Miller's solar plexus. Oof! Miller doubled over, the air rushing out of him. Titus swept Miller's leg hard. Miller's boots lost traction on the polished floor, and he fell, crashing heavily onto his back. The rifle slid across the floor. Miller thrashed about, reaching for a backup weapon, a Glock tucked into his belt. "Don't do it," Titus said. Titus stood over him. The Sig Sauer was pointed directly at Miller's face. The laser sight was a firm red dot right between Miller's eyes. "Don't do it, son. It's over." Miller froze. He looked at the old man. He saw the gun barrel. But more terrifying than the gun was the look in Titus's eyes. It wasn't hate. It was pity. "You," Miller gasped, coughing for air. "You ruined me." "You ruined yourself," Titus said. "Now turn around, hands behind your back." "Or what?" Miller spat blood through his teeth. "Are you going to kill me? Do it." "I'd rather be dead than—" Miller's hand moved to his belt. Bam! Titus fired. He didn't aim for the head. He aimed for the shoulder. The bullet pierced Miller's right shoulder, shattering his collarbone and rendering his gun arm useless. Miller let out a high-pitched shriek that cut through the thunder. He writhed on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "I told you," Titus repeated, his voice calm over the ringing in his ears. "Hands behind your back." Titus kicked the backup gun away. He pulled a pair of zip ties from his back pocket, which he had prepared, and turned the sobbing, bleeding Miller face down. He tightened the ties firmly. "Maya," Titus called. "Call 911. Tell them we have a downed intruder. Tell them to send an ambulance." Titus knelt beside Miller, who was now weeping, the adrenaline gone, replaced by the agony of the gunshot wound. "It hurts," Miller sobbed. "It hurts." Titus pressed a clean towel from the dining room table against the wound, applying pressure. "I know." Titus kept his hand steady as he saved the life of the man who had tried to kill him. "Pain is a great teacher, Brody. Try to listen to it." Sirens wailed in the distance, cutting through the storm. The cavalry was approaching, but the war was over. The chief had stuck to the line. Brody Miller's trial wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a public exorcism for the city of Oak Haven. The county courthouse was besieged by media vans from as far away as New York and Los Angeles. The headline was irresistible: "Former Chief versus Rogue Cop." Inside courtroom B, the air was stale and tense. Miller sat at the defense table, his arm in an elaborate sling, his face pale and gaunt. The swagger that had defined him in the park was gone, replaced by a nervous, harassed look. His attorney, a public defender named Samuel Vance, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Titus Thorne sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. He wore his dress uniform, the midnight blue of the Detroit Police Department, gold stars around his collar, his Medal of Valor gleaming on his chest. He didn't wear it out of vanity. He wore it to remind the jury what a real cop looked like. Maya Thorne had been granted leave to assist the district attorney as a special consultant. She was the architect of Miller's downfall. "Your Honor," Maya said, pacing before the jury during cross-examination, "the defense claims that Mr. Miller acted in self-defense, that he entered Titus Thorne's home believing he was executing a court order. But let's look at the facts." She turned to Miller, who was sweating on the stand. "Mr. Miller," Maya said, her voice high-pitched, "did you have a warrant?" I had probable cause," Miller stammered. "It was a threat." "It was an elderly man sitting in his living room," Maya corrected. "You broke down his door at 2 a.m. You were intoxicated. Your toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of 0.18. That's twice the legal limit. You weren't executing a warrant, Mr. Miller. You were hunting." "He had a gun," Miller shouted, losing his composure. "He shot me." "He shot you after you fired 3 shots in your living room," Maya said, projecting a picture of the bullet-riddled couch onto the screen. "He shot you in the shoulder to neutralize the threat." "I could have shot him in the head." "You saved his life, didn't you?" Miller looked down at his lap. "I don't know." "You don't know?" Maya stepped closer. "You're alive, Mr. Miller. This is how you know. My father, a man you called a bum, a criminal, and a thug, applied the tourniquet that stopped you from bleeding out on your dining room floor. He showed you more mercy in 5 minutes than you've shown this community in 5 years. The jury was spellbound. The evidence was overwhelming. The dashcam footage from the broken rear brake, the text messages from the Blue Shield chat log the FBI had recovered, and the 911 call where Miller could be heard yelling profanities before the shooting began. But the final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected witness. The prosecution called Sergeant Sarah Jenkins to the stand. "Sergeant," the district attorney asked, "did Officer Miller ever express racist views in your presence?" Jenkins took a deep breath. She looked at Miller and then at Titus. She chose her side of the story. "Yes," she said clearly. "On multiple occasions, he boasted about cleaning up trash in the park. He referred to minority residents as invaders. I was too afraid to report him because his father was the former vice mayor. But I'm not afraid anymore." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Miller's head jerked up, betrayal in his eyes. His shield was gone. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the jury foreman, a middle-aged schoolteacher, stood. His hands were steady. "In the case of the People versus Brody Miller, we find the defendant. Count 1, attempted first-degree murder, guilty. Count 2, aggravated assault, guilty. Count 3, deprivation of civil rights, guilty. Count 4, burglary with a deadly weapon, guilty." Judge Reynolds peered over his glasses at Miller. "Mr. Miller, you betrayed the public trust in the most despicable way possible. You used your badge as a shield for your own bigotry. I sentence you to 25 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. Miller slumped forward, sobbing into his good arm. The marshals moved. As they led him away, he glanced back at the gallery. His eyes met Titus's. Titus didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded. A final, solemn closing of the book. The bus ride to Ironwood State Correctional Facility was the longest of Brody Miller's 4-hour life. Shackled hand and foot, strapped to a metal bench next to the very people he used to hunt, Miller stared through the wire mesh window at the world passing by. He watched the trees blur, realizing with an unpleasant knot in his stomach that he wouldn't see a tree without a fence in front of it for 25 years. He was silently processed. The correctional officers didn't offer him the brotherly nod he expected. To them, a dirty cop was worse than a criminal. He was a risk. He was stripped, searched, and given a bright orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. Because of his former status, Miller was placed in administrative segregation, ADG, protective custody. But the inmates called it the hole. His cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, a concrete slab for a bed, a stainless steel toilet, a slit window that showed only a patch of gray sky. For a man who had thrived on the power of roaming the streets, confinement was a special kind of psychological torture. For the first 3 months, Miller clung to his anger. He paced the small cell like a caged wolf, muttering to himself. He blamed Titus Thorne. He blamed the warden. He blamed the woke jury. He replayed the moment in the common room 1,000 times, convincing himself that he was the victim, that he was the one who had been wronged. But prison has a way of grinding away even the hardest stones. The isolation began to rot him from the inside out. He spent 23 hours a day alone. Recreation time was spent in a solitary pen in the yard, a wire mesh kennel where he could smell the fresh air but couldn't touch the grass. From the general population yard, jeers drifted over the fence like poison gas. "Hey, Officer 4922, a voice would yell. Miller shuddered every time they used his old badge number. "Are you comfortable in there? Do you want me to call a crane for your dignity? Hey, Miller, I got some birdseed for you. Come get it, kid." He was the most hated man in Ironwood. White gangs shunned him because he was damaged material and a badge traitor. Black and Latino gangs wanted his blood. He was an island in an ocean of sharks. Then came the day the protection failed. 6 months into his sentence, Miller was being escorted to the infirmary for a routine check of his gunshot wound. The bullet from Titus's gun had left him with a constant ache, a throbbing reminder of the night he lost everything. The escort was a new guard, Officer Graves. Graves was young, dull, and, unbeknownst to Miller, deeply indebted to a gang leader in C Block. As they walked down the long, linoleum-lined corridor that connected the housing unit to the medical wing, Graves stopped. "Just a minute," Graves murmured, tapping his earpiece. "Radio test." He stepped aside, leaving Miller alone in the corridor. Miller frowned. "Hey, you can't just leave me here," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete blocks. A heavy steel door at the end of the corridor clicked. It hadn't closed properly. Miller's heart pounded against his ribs. He heard the sound of boots, not the rhythmic, heavy tread of guards, but the hurried, scraping sound of inmates in canvas shoes. 3 men entered the corridor. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. In prison, reputation is everything, and taking down a dirty cop was a badge of honor. Miller recognized the leader, a burly man named Marcus, serving a life sentence for a robbery Miller's old partner had botched. "No," Miller whispered, backing away until his back hit the cold wall. "Officer Graves, help!" There was no response. The hallway was silent except for the whir of fluorescent lights and approaching footsteps. "You like making people lie on the floor, don't you, Brody?" Marcus asked, his voice deceptively gentle. "You like being on top of them? Making them feel small?" Miller tried to raise his hands, but the handcuffs restricted his movement. "Stay back, I'll scream." "Go ahead and scream. It's soundproof." The beating wasn't chaotic. It was surgical. They didn't use knives. They didn't want to kill him. Death was too easy. They wanted to take away the one thing Miller valued most, his physical dominance. They brought him down with a single blow. As he lay gasping on the ground, Marcus grabbed Miller's ankles. "You used to walk with your head held high in our streets," Marcus snarled. "Now you drag your feet." The kick was precise. A heavy boot landed hard on the lower part of his spine, right at the lumbar junction. Crack! The sound was disgustingly loud, like a dry twig snapping in a winter storm. Miller didn't scream. The air simply left his body in a ragged gasp. A beam of hot, white light shot through his back, instantly followed by a terrifying, cold numbness that coursed up his legs. When the guards finally arrived 2 minutes later, the corridor was empty. Miller lay on the floor, staring at the overhead lights, tears streaming silently down his face. He tried to move his legs. He commanded them to move. They didn't respond. A year later, the winter had been harsh, but spring had burst forth in Oak Haven with a vengeance. The air was sweet with the scent of blossoming honeysuckle and damp earth. Titus Thorne stood on a podium in the center of what used to be a wasteland of garbage on the south side of town, the poorest district, a place the police usually ignored unless they were looking for arrests. Today, the lot was completely transformed. A brand new building, gleaming with glass and brick, stood where there had once been only emptiness. A playground, filled with children's laughter, stretched out behind them. Titus looked older. His hair was now completely silver, but his bearing was as upright as ever. Beside him, Mir smiled proudly, and next to him, Chief Robert Harrison, with an expression of humility and gratitude. "Thank you all for joining us," Titus said into the microphone. The crowd, an amalgamation of neighborhood residents, city officials, and police officers, fell silent. "A year ago, darkness visited my home," Titus continued. "A man tried to instill fear to break this community. He thought power resided in a gun and a badge. He believed himself untouchable because of his position." Titus paused, taking in the faces of those present. But justice is curious. It not only punishes the wicked, but it restores balance. When we won the civil suit against the city and the police union, my daughter asked me what I wanted to do with the money. It was a considerable sum, millions of dollars, intended to compensate for the pain and suffering inflicted by Officer Miller. Titus turned, gesturing to the building behind him. A heavy velvet curtain covered the nameplate above the doors. "I didn't want the money," Titus stated. "I wanted to ensure that no child in this neighborhood grew up thinking that the only way to have power is by bullying others. I wanted to transform a legacy of hate into a foundation of love." He nodded to Maya. She pulled the cord. The velvet curtain slid aside, revealing the inscription. The crowd stifled a cheer, then murmured, and finally a wave of applause erupted, growing into a roar. The sign above the door read, "The Brody Miller Center for Youth Development, dedicated to justice, equality, and community policing." "We used his name," Titus said, a faint, bitter smile curving his lips. "We spent every penny of his pension, his estate, and the compensation money to build this for good. The name Brody Miller will no longer be associated with racism or police brutality. It will be the place where children learn to read, to play, and to respect one another. We took his name and gave it to the people he hated. It was the ultimate victory." Titus hadn't just defeated Miller, he had rewritten his story. Miles away in the playground of Ironwood Medical Unit, a wheelchair sat in the shade of a high wall. Brody Miller sat in it, a blanket covering his useless legs. He looked 20 years older. His face was gaunt, his eyes empty from depression and medication. He held a crumpled newspaper in his lap. It was a week old. The headline read, "New Youth Center Opens, Victory for Civil Rights." He saw the photograph. Titus Thorne cutting the ribbon. And above Titus's head, his own name, Miller, carved in stone, welcoming a diverse crowd of smiling children. Miller's hand trembled as he stared at the picture. He wanted to tear it to pieces. He wanted to scream, but he no longer had the strength to fight. The irony crushed him with more weight than any boot. He was funding the very future he had tried to suppress. A bird landed on the wire fence in front of him. A sparrow. Miller watched the bird. He remembered the park. He remembered the handcuffs. He remembered the feeling of the wind on his face when he could still walk. "Go away," Miller whispered, his voice cracking. The bird chirped, tilted its head, and soared up, gliding over the barbed wire, free and unburdened. Miller watched it go until it was just a dot in the vast blue sky. He grabbed the wheels of his chair, turned around, and slowly and painfully made his way back to his cage. Titus Thorne had been right. The badge was a heavy burden, but nothing was heavier than the weight of one's own sins. Wow. Now, that's what I call restorative justice. Titus not only survived, but he turned his attacker's name into a symbol of hope for the very community Miller despised. That's a level of karmic chess play rarely seen in real life. Miller lost his job, his freedom, his legs, and ultimately, even the legacy of his own name. It serves as a brutal reminder. When you dig someone else's grave, you'd better dig deep. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the punishment was fitting for the crime? Was using Miller's name for the youth center a stroke of genius or just plain mean? Let me know in the comments if this story kept you on the edge of your seat. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We upload new stories of justice, karma, and survival every week. Share this video with a friend who needs a win today. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and always trust your instincts.